Hello everybody, this is Rudra Pradhan here. Welcome to BMD lecture series. Today we will start with decision analytics. In the last couple of lectures, we have already discussed several business analytics tools under the umbrella of descriptive analytics, predictive analytics and prescriptive analytics, and we have discussed several business problems, and then we have connected with various analytical tools under the structure of descriptive analytics, predictive analytics and prescriptive analytics, and then come with a kind of a management decision as per the particular business requirement or management requirement. So, in the similar lines, we will discuss today the component called as decision analytics. Here we will address some of the analytics tools to look for the management decision corresponding to a particular business problem. So, to start with the particular structure. So, this is the last unit of this particular course, and the typical objectives are making decision with a uncertain information, understanding the foundation of decision trees, knowing the value of information, knowing the utility and decision making process, and knowing the steps of the decision making process, and describes the different types of decision making environments, and knowing the use of Excel spreadsheet to set up and to solve problems involving decision making process, and develop accurate and useful decision trees, and finally to understand the importance and the use of utility theory in the decision making process. So, the typical highlights are to know the decision strategy for a minimum objective, decision strategy for a maximum objective, then decision trees and risk matrix, value of information and the perfect information, Bayes theorem and the utility theory. So, these are the typical highlights which we will address in this particular unit, that to decision analytics. So, here we have a kind of business problem. So, here we may have a different alternatives, different strategy. Under the different strategy and the alternatives, we like to pick up a kind of situation through which we can address this same business problem, and then come with a kind of decision making through which we can actually apply some kind of strategy or some kind of forecasting issues through which you can bring the kind of efficient business environment, or the kind of flexible environment through which we can address the business issues more effectively. And there are a couple of issues which you can highlight here in the case of decision analytics. So, first of all, what is exactly decision analytics? So, it is an analytic and systematic approach to study the process of decision making, and mostly it is based on logical kind of structure. Consider all possible alternatives, examine all the available informations, and then okay. So, these are the kind of discussion which you can have here, and so the typical decision making process based on particular logical issues, and consider all possible alternatives, then highlights all available information about the future requirement, and applies this decision modeling approach to address the business problem. So, these are all the items which we like to connect, and then to address the business problem as per the particular requirement. So, what we will do here? So, we typically like to know what are the process through which you can come with a kind of decision making to a kind of correspond business problem. So, that means we have a business problem. So, we have different strategy, different alternatives, then how best we can come with a kind of decision making process through which you can address the business problem more effectively. So, decision analytics basically 5-step process, and the first one is to define the problem. So, means as usual we have discussed descriptive analytics, predictive analytics and prescriptive analytics. So, every times the first end requirement is to define the problem accurately. Once you define the problem, understand the problems, then we can set the objectives, connect with the data and the kind of tools, then we can analyze and come with a kind of decision through which you can address the business problem more effectively. So, in this case also the same process we have to follow. So, as a result, so the first step of the particular process is to define the problem, list out possible alternatives and identify all possible outcomes for each alternatives and identify the payoff for each alternative and outcome combine, then use a decision modeling technique to choose a particular alternative. So, that means in the last couple of lectures we have discussed prescriptive analytics. So, here the idea is you have to find out several alternatives and then look for the optimality that where we can have values of the decision variables through which you can actually optimize the objective functions corresponding to the requirement of minimizations or maximization. So, in the similar angle here we also like to address this business problem, then come with a kind of best solution out of possible alternatives. Okay. So, this is how the typical requirement. So, now in order to just address how these 5 steps will work. So, we can start like this and so the first one is the decision. So, this is a kind of examples where we should make and sell storage sets. So, this is as per this particular examples, and then in the second steps we like to list out all the alternatives. So, that means in this particular examples we have 3 alternatives: build a large plant, build a small plant and then do nothing, and corresponding all these 3 alternatives we have 3 different outcomes, that is the demand for sets, that is with respect to high, moderate and then low. So, that means we have 3 alternatives corresponding to 3 alternatives. So, we have 3 different outcomes. So, that means these 3 outcomes high, moderate and low will be available for large plant and small plant and then nothing. So, that means altogether, so we have a 3 options. So, that means altogether we have 9 options, and out of which we have to choose a particular option through which the particular business problems will be very effective and then come with a kind of decision making situation through which you can highlight the problems more effectively. So, now in order to address this issue, so the next step is to prepare a payoff table, that is what is sometimes called as payoff matrix corresponding to the outcomes and alternatives, and we have different alternatives corresponding to different alternatives. So, the different strategy like high demand, moderate demand and low demand. So, we have actually options. So, for instance, in this case we have these 3 alternative 1 and alternative 2 and alternative 3, and in the case of high demand this is actually to 200,000 and then this is 90,000 and this is 0, and similarly in the case of moderate demand. So, for a large plant we have 100,000 and as for small plant it is 50,000 and for no plant it is 0. And in the case of low demand, the large plant having outcome 120,000 minus 120,000 and then for small plant it is minus 20,000 and then no plant it will be 0. So, that means for each head means for each alternatives we have the outcome, and these outcomes are available at high demand, moderate demand and low demand, and then finally we like to have a select and apply decision analysis model. So, now corresponding to this payoff matrix and the kind of objective which you have actually fixed here. So, we can actually see what should be the final outcome. So, that means typically what I have mentioned here corresponding to 3 alternatives and 3 different heads like high demand, moderate demand and low demand. So, we have here actually 9 different outcomes. So, for a decision making process and that too for this objective of this problem. So, one particular outcome will be the final choice to address the problem and then come with a kind of management decision. So, that is how it can be 200,000, it can be 0 or it can be minus 120,000. So, like this we have a different kind of option, but so we have to select a particular options, and for that we have a different strategy altogether, and that all the strategy to pick up a particular options corresponding to this corresponding to these alternatives. So, exclusively depends upon various tools. That is the kind of analytic structure through which we can actually select a particular options, and then we can analyze the problem or come with a decision making process. So, this decision making environment means what I have mentioned here. So, we have 5 different process, and all the process can be highlighted through these payoff tables. Then the payoff tables gives the indication that what are the possible alternatives we have corresponding to the particular business problem. Then a particular option need to be selected to address the business problem and come with a management decision. So, now so far as the payoff matrix is concerned corresponding to this problem. So, we can have any one, but what is the typical decision process, decision making process. So, we have 3 different options. Type 1, so decision making under certainty, and second decision making under uncertainty, and third decision making under risk. So, that means we are living in a kind of dynamic environment, and business environment is by the way is very volatile, and in fact most of the business environment is highly competitive, and there are high chance that we have risks and we have uncertainty, and within these kind of obstacles we have to find out the best decision through which you can address the business problem. So, that means typically there are 2 different situations. One situation is completely certain and another situation completely uncertain, and in the case of certain, so there is no extra kind of analytics required to come with a kind of decisions or to choose a particular outcome. And in the case of risk and uncertainty, so you need to have a proper strategy or proper analytical tools through which you can come with a kind of output through which you can address the business problem. So, by the way, so what we can do here, so we like to know what are these 3 options. So, before we go for go for the discussion of these 3 options. So, I like to highlight 3 concepts in the kind of decision analytics problem. So, the decision alternatives are the various choices or options that is available to the decision maker in any given problem situation. This is the first one, and second means that is what we have already highlighted, the 5 step process. So, it will give you actually 3 different structural kind of understanding and structural kind of requirement through which you can quickly and best way to come with a kind of decision. Then the second one is the states of nature or the chances of nature that can affect the outcome of the decision, and they are beyond the decision maker's control. So, that is how the uncertainty and risks will be coming into the picture, and then payoffs are the benefits or rewards that result from selecting a particular decision alternatives. They are often expressed in sometimes a particular units, but may be stated in other units such as market share. So, that means we must have a kind of unit of expression through which you can you can effectively address or effectively quantify the particular decision making process. So, ultimately, so 3 things. So, various alternatives, various outcomes corresponding to the alternatives, then prepare the payoffs through which you can address the business problem, because the payoff will give you the possible outcomes corresponding to the various alternatives and various strategy behind this problem. So, now what we have already mentioned, so there are three different situations: the certainty situations, uncertainty situation, and under risk involvement. So, the decision making table will be like this. So, we have here decision alternative this side, and then these are all various outputs, the kind of predictions, and so corresponding to the alternatives we have a different output labels, and then so these are all actually payoff matrix. So, that means these are all possible outcomes corresponding to the various alternatives. For instance, in this case, so D1, D2, D3, DM are the decision alternatives, and S1, S2, S3, Sn are states of nature. Then Pij, so the entire matrix, that is called as payoff matrix. So, the items under payoff matrix can be represented as Pij. So, it will have actually diagonal elements, off diagonal elements, on diagonal elements, and the diagonal elements where I equal to j. So, that means the representation will be P11, P22, P33 like this, and then others are called as cross diagonals, and where I not equal to j. But whatever may be the kind of case, whether it is I equal to j or I not equal to j. So, every case we have a kind of outcome corresponding to the various decision alternatives. So, now with this we can actually find out the case where you can address the business problem. So, the first case is the case of certainty. So, here consequence of every alternative is known. So, this is how the advantage from the means for the decision makers, and then usually only one outcome for each alternatives, and the fact is that it is actually very occasional. So, that means if you say that all the business are having very much certain, then there is no extra kind of strategy or extra analytics will be required to come to find out a particular outcome through which you can make the decision more effectively. So, of course, there is a case, but it is very rare in a kind of real life situation or business environment. So, then second one is the case of uncertainty, and where the possible outcomes connected with the probabilities, the way we have discussed the kind of payoff matrix. So, here corresponding to various alternatives we have a kind of output, and every output is connected with the probability. So, that means the moment you connected probability with the possible or predicted outcome. So, that means there is a high chance of or there is a kind of mismatch between the kind of actual and the kind of forecasted. So, obviously, so through probability it can be adjusted, and as a result we can come with a kind of decision through which you can address the problem more effectively. So, in the kind of uncertainty environment, business environment, with respect to outcomes and various probability involvement. So, the decision making methods to choose a particular outcome corresponding to a particular business problem. So, we have a several methods, maximax, first one is the maximax, then max mean, then criterion of realism, then equally likely, and minimax regret, right. So, these are all 5 different possible kind of methods or analytics through which we can predict the business environment where the situation is completely uncertain, right. So, let us start with one by one. Then first one is the making decision with uncertain information, and here the objective of business analytic models is to provide the decision makers with information needed to make decisions, and there are often trade offs to consider when making decisions. Since there is a uncertainty and various alternatives, of course, there is a possibility of trade offs. So, within various alternatives and the kind of uncertainty, So, we like to extract the kind of trade-offs, and then within the particular trade-offs, we have to find out the best which can address where you can address the business problem more effectively. So, then making decisions is the requirement, where human assessment of factors not included in the kind of analytical models. Means the idea is that through a particular structure, we have to select a particular outcome corresponding to various alternatives and various uncertainty situations. Otherwise, the particular judgment may not be very effective. So, that is how we have a different kind of methods, decision making methods or decision making tools, and the particular decision will be targeted and will be obtained through these management decision tools only. So, understanding the philosophy of decision making and how to deal with uncertainty and risks, and that is a vital importance to being a good manager. That means having various alternatives, various uncertainty kind of situations, which particular outcome we have to pick up under a different kind of mechanisms. So, that is one of the biggest challenge for the decision makers, and that too a manager who can take the management decision. So, we have a different methods, and there is a high chance some kind of conflicts and some kind of trade-offs you may find while picking up a particular outcome under means with respect to various alternatives and possible outcomes. So, that means corresponding to various alternatives, we have a different possible outcomes, and all outcomes cannot be useful for the decision making process. A particular outcome which is to which to be the best can be finally picked up to address the business problem. So, that means like prescriptive analytics. So, the first step of the process is the corresponding to various alternatives. You have to find out all possible outcomes, and these are all by default various alternatives to the decision making process. Then you have to pick up a particular outcome through which you can address the business problem. For instance, in the case of prescriptive analytics, so the first hand idea is to find out to the corner points corresponding to various constants and the conditions. Then to choose a particular corner point for optimizing the objective functions, you have to find out the values of the variable and then put into the kind of objective function and check where the objective function will give optimized value, that is either at the highest or at the lowest, depending upon the a specification of the maximization of the objective functions and minimization of the objective function. So, now on the process is what should be the typical management decision with a uncertainty kind of environment where the information is not actually clear or not certain altogether. So, with all the informations means available informations, so we have a connection with probability. So, that means if you say uncertain, then there is no way to predict and then come with a kind of decision making process. So, that is why to make uncertain to certain. So, there is a need of some kind of quantification, and the uncertainty environment to certainty environment depends upon the involvement of probability structure. So, means completely let us say completely uncertain to certain depends upon the amount of probability. For instance, if it is exactly the probability value will be 0 to 1. So, if it is exactly 1, then that means the particular uncertainty informations can be completely certain, and then if it is let us say close to 0, that means the particular environment is very high unpredictable and not very perfect kind of scenario through which you can address the business problem. So, that means in the simple language, higher the probability corresponding to the particular outcome, higher is the kind of effectiveness and higher is the kind of management decision. And if the particular probability corresponding to the particular outcome is very low, then it is a kind of high risk management kind of scenario. In that case, so the decision making process will be very sensitive kind of environment. Otherwise, if a probability will be very high, then obviously the difference between the actual and the predicted will be very less, and as a result the decision making process will be very effective. But ultimately it does not it is not anybody's hand. So, it depends upon the various alternative, the kind of business environment and the kind of business plan, and through this process we have to find out a situation that is the best situation through which you can address the business problem as per the particular requirement. So, under the decision making process, that is with respect to uncertain information. So, many decisions involve making a choice between a small set of decisions with uncertain consequences. So, that means when you take a particular options, so there is a kind of reaction. So, it is a game between action and reaction. That is why what we can say that consequences. So, if you pick up a particular outcome to address the business problem, so ultimately what is the consequences? If the probability is very high corresponding to a particular output level, then the consequence, the predictive consequence can be effectively addressed. But if it is very low probability, then it is highly kind of risky to generate the particular consequences. So, what will we have here? So, is means such decision making process involve a number of decision alternatives and outcomes that may occur, that is what it is called as events. Then the payoffs associated with these events sometimes summarized in the form of a payoff tables, or it is called as payoff matrix. So, now so let us start with simple kind of examples, making decision with uncertain informations. So, the example is selecting a mortgage instrument where a family is considering purchasing a new flat and wants to finance $150,000. So, that means this is a kind of problem background. So, it is a question of financial investment, and that too in a kind of real estate business, right. So, the typical problem is to purchase a new flat or new house corresponding to the investment financial investment decision, and that too it is the matter of $150,000 to be invested, and that too with 3 mortgage options. So, the decision will be 1 year ARM, 3 year ARM and 30 year fixed rate. So, the outcome will be with respect to the rates increase, rates stables and the rates decrease, right. So, 3 mortgage options are available, and the payoff table for these outcomes are available here, and that too with respect to these 3 alternatives. So, 1 year ARM, 3 year ARM and then 30 year fixed investment. So, the possible outcomes are with respect to increasing rate, stable rate and the decreasing rate. So, we have again 9 options like the case which we have already highlighted under the various means 5 steps process, and that too the one of the particular step is the payoff matrix, and this particular table is nothing but a payoff matrix. That means the all possible outcomes corresponding to various alternatives and the kind of business environment, right. So, we have different options. So, now any particular option can be the best target, but without any analytics we are not in a position to pick up a particular structure. So, in this case we like to apply some of the decision making tools, like we have already discussed max mean or max, and then the kind of various other alternatives techniques through which you can take the decision. And in this case what will you do? In the first case the particular with respect to this particular requirement. So, let us see here. So, that means technically we have already highlighted here, but that highlight is with respect to with respect to a particular management decision management decision tools only. So, that means the analytic tools through a particular analytics tools we like to highlight in this case we have to target this one, and here we have a 61,000 approximately, 56,000 approximately, and then 54,000 approximately. That means the lowest one is considered here, and same things in the case of second outcomes, that is where rate is stable. So, we have 51,000 approximately, we have 54,000 approximately, and then we have actually the kind of 46. So, that means technically out of all these 3, so we are targeting 46, that is the lowest one. Against out of these 3 alternatives we are picking up the lowest one. So, that means the minimum one for each case has been picked up, and then finally we have 3 different options. So, that is out of all these 9 options, the first option is to streamline the process into 3. Then against out of these 3 we have to select the best. If it is the kind of minimization process, then out of this 3 minimization, against we have to find out what is the minimum of these 3. So, that means typically 54, 46 and 40. So, this could be the kind of final target through which you can address the business problem and come with a kind of management decision. That means this is a kind of effective strategy through which you have to choose and then to come with a kind of decisions. That means technically in front of us we have a several kind of structural things through which you can come with a kind of decision. So, that means what kind of strategy we have to apply to judge a particular outcome corresponding to a business problem with respect to various objectives and the kind of alternatives. So, ultimately there are 2 different kind of criteria here. So, first criteria is decision strategy for a minimum objective, and the other one is the decision strategy for a maximum objective. So, we start with first the decision strategy for minimum objective, where we have couple of issues. So, first issue is the average payoff strategy, then the second one is aggressive strategy, third one is the conservative strategy, and then fourth one is the opportunity loss strategy. So, in the first case average payoff strategy, so we have to take the average of all possible outcomes against or various alternatives, then take the decision. Then in the case of aggressive strategy, so it is the kind of mean kind of situations, we have to find out minimum of all possible outcomes, then against minimum of minimum the kind of choice of the decision. Then the third one is the conservative strategy, where we can actually use the minimax principles. That means first we will find out maximum of all possible outcomes, then we choose the minimum among the maximum. And the last one is the opportunity loss strategy, where we use minimax regret. So, here the choose of the strategy with the minimum opportunity loss, that is the payoff, best payoff for that outcome. So, that means these are all various possible strategy or the criteria through which you can come with a kind of decision making to address the business problem and come with a kind of management decision through which you can effectively analyze the business scenario. So, now how we can apply these techniques in a kind of business environment where we have a various alternatives with uncertainty connecting to probability, with probability, without probability, then with probability we have a equality of kind of situation, inequality kind of situation, and in each case how is the kind of decision making process. So, we can actually see the situation and come with a kind of understanding and the kind of strategy through which you can pick up a particular outcome to address the business problem. So, we will discuss all these techniques in the next class, and in the meantime we will stop here. Thank you very much. Have a nice day.